Hello, bonjour. This is the course French for Beginners, Introduction to the French Language. Welcome back. Bienvenue. We're happy you're joining us today and we hope you will enjoy this new lecture. In this lecture, we're going to talk about vowels in French. This is still part of our Introduction to French Phonetics. Learning objectives, or as we call them in French, objectifs d'apprentissage. In this lecture, you will learn what vowels in French sound like. You will also learn basic conventions when reading and spelling out vowel sounds in French. This lecture will be split into 3 different parts, which you can watch in any order you like. Now, as I was saying, we are going to start part 2. If you've missed part 1, you might want to watch it first, or you can watch it later, it's up to you. But I still advise you watch it first because we've seen some important things in that lesson. In part 2, we will see that when you combine 2 or more vowels together, you get a whole new sound. So this new vowel sound will depend which letters you're combining. For example, you can combine A and I. We have the sound E here. It sounds exactly like the sound we saw in part 1, which was with E accent grave, which was, for example, in mère and père. So here we have mais. Another combination we can have is A plus U, which forms the O sound. If you saw the previous parts, you will notice there was hôtel, which sounds the same. So here we have faux. If you watch the previous part, you will remember that we saw the word hôtel or hôpital, which sounds exactly like the sound O. Now we will see O plus I, which forms the sound wa. Wa we find, for example, in the word moi, which means me. O plus U together is forming the sound ou, which you have, for example, in the word cou. E plus U is forming the sound e, like in peu. If you remember, in part 1 we saw the word le, which is pronounced exactly in the same way. E plus A plus U can be combined together to form the sound O. This is really strange, I know, but this is just the way it sounds. It sounds exactly like in hôtel or hôpital. It sounds also the same as in the word faux, which you have above. So here, E plus A plus U, they just combine to make the sound O, like in the word beau. Now if you have O plus E plus U, you have the sound E, just like in E plus U, which you have above. Like we had peu or le, we have the word ve, which sounds the same. Now this one I've kept last because it's actually not that frequent. You will have a few words with it, but it's way less common than all the other combinations we've seen above. So we have E plus I making the sound E. If you hear it carefully, you will notice that it sounds like in père and mère, or like in mais that we had above. It's the sound E. For example, here we have the word peine. Peine and père and mère, I'm sure you hear the similarities. So don't get too scared by the fact that it's spelled in a weird way, because it's not very common. You will see way more frequently the spelling with A plus I, or the spelling with the E accent grave. Now, I'm not going to explain all these words, but you can obviously find them in an online dictionary like the one I linked to in the previous lecture. When you combine some vowels with specific consonant, you get new vowel sounds. Some of them are called nasal sounds. We have en, un, on, and un. Here I know you see a lot of different spellings, but there are actually only 4 nasal sounds. We have en, as I said, which you find, for example, in the word plan or lent. Un, which you find in words like fin or lynx. Un, which you find in the word oncle, for example. And then un, which you have in the word un. It sounds pretty similar to un, as in fin and lynx, but this is because I'm French. In Canada, you hear a stronger distinction between the un sound and the un sound. In France, we don't really make the difference anymore. It's more in Old French that there used to be a difference. So if you go to Canada, it's important to know the difference, but in France, people won't really notice or people won't really care if you pronounce un instead of un. The most common spelling you will see is going to be with a vowel combined with an N. But there's also another possible spelling, which is going to be a vowel combined with an M. So they will sound exactly the same. We will have en, un, on, and un. For example, you have lampe or membre. I'm sure you recognize here words like lamp or member in English, which actually come from Old French. Un, you will find in words like impossible or olympique. On, you will find in words like nombre. A lot of the time in words with on in French, you will notice in English you will use a U instead. For example, I mentioned earlier oncle, which is uncle in English, and here we have nombre, which is number in English. Then for the un sound, we have humble, which is humble in English. Now, before moving to part 3, I would advise that you review all these sounds because we've seen the vowels combined together, which make different sounds, but also now the vowels making nasal sounds when combined with N or M. Before moving on to the next part, please review those because that's already a lot of different sounds to memorize. In the next part, we will see what happens when you combine some vowels with other consonants which can sometimes change the way they sound.